Rosalia Csengeri and her family were part of the Jewish community in Șimleau, Silvanie, a town in Transylvania, Romania. In 1937, Mrs. Csengeri had twin daughters named Judith and Leah. There was another Jewish woman in the nearby town of Ports who also had twins, Jaffa Moses, whose girls were named Eva and Miriam. Rosie and Jaffa enjoyed comparing notes about raising their girls. But life changed radically for the Jewish families in that region during World War II. In 1942, Mrs. Csengeri's husband, Tzvi, was deported for forced labor in the Ukraine. Rationing and increasingly harsh treatment made it even more difficult to be Jewish during this time, and Rosie was on her own to raise the children. In May of 1944, Mrs. Csengeri and her daughters were deported to Auschwitz from the same ghetto as the Moses family. Upon arrival in Auschwitz, Mrs. Csengeri's twins were selected for experiments under the direction of Nazi doctor Joseph Mengele. Somehow, she was able to convince Mengele that she should be kept alive to help care for her twins. In the living hell of Auschwitz, Rosie continually risked her life to bring bread, water, and clothing to her twin girls at night. When Eva Moses lay deathly ill in the sick ward, Rosie brought bread to her that Eva's sister Miriam had saved. Eva and Miriam survived Auschwitz, as did Mrs. Csengeri and her daughters. After liberation, aid workers sent Eva and Miriam to a Polish convent to be cared for by nuns. At age 11 and in the middle of war-torn Europe, Eva and Miriam had no idea how to get home or if any of their family had survived. Eva found Mrs. Csengeri living in a nearby displaced persons camp. She agreed to claim Eva and Miriam as her nieces so that they could live with her. Mrs. Csengeri cared for them like a mother and promised to help them get back home. In September of 1945, after months of journeying, Mrs. Csengeri fulfilled her promise. Eva and Miriam arrived at their home. Rosie and her girls returned to their own home, only to find it ransacked and plundered. But 2 weeks later, they got a surprise better than anything they could possess. Rosie's husband returned. Reunited, the family moved to Israel in 1960 and had a son, Michael. Though Mrs. Csengeri has passed away, her memory lives on in her children and grandchildren. Eva remembers Mrs. Csengeri for the risks she took for her and Miriam during and after Auschwitz. We celebrate Mrs. Rosalia Csengeri's spirit, her dedication to family, and the power of the promise she kept to Eva and Miriam Moses. She is a 2014 recipient of the Candles Eternal Light Award.